Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Senteon and CIS webinar series. We've been doing this for quite a while, Rich.
Bringing it. I like it.
So, we do this weekly webinar series to help educate primarily the managed security service provider market, but everyone who will listen on the CIS benchmarks, what they are, why they're important, and how they may be disruptive and not applicable in your environment at times. I'm your host, Zach Kromkowski from Senteon, joined by my co-host, Rich McGraw from CIS. Welcome. Glad to have you back, man. 2 weeks in a
Thank
row.
you. Yeah, no, it's tough being off, but I'm glad to be back. Coming back mentally stronger and ready to go.
That's right. And every week we do have a special guest. Today we're joined by Adam Evans, Security Director of Simplex IT. So thank you for joining us, Adam.
Yep, thanks for having me. Been enjoying the webinar series and seeing this go, so it's an awesome chance to actually be here and talk a little bit.
It's been growing every week. Our newsletter's almost at 1,000 subscribers. I think 2 more weeks we'll hit that number. So really excited for all the support on this, everyone.
I've been getting tons of replays on my LinkedIn page, each episode. So it's very, very satisfying to see.
It is. It's good to give back. So Adam, I think I introduced to you first maybe a year ago. Really been working together. You're an expert in the space, and you actually started at that tier 1 help desk position in MSP. So you've really come up through the ranks to be a security director today. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about your journey, how you got into the security space, and what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got started before I even got in the IT industry. I thought the whole hacker concept was like the coolest thing ever. And I started, sharpening those skills and learning about it and realized that there's the whole bad guy side of stuff, which is usually pretty career restricting if you go down that road. But then realizing that organizations and companies have a need for good security. When I got my first MSP job, I still had that interest in doing just some threat remediation. This was like 5, 6, 10 years ago, somewhere in that range. And then just continuously learning and growing and moving up the ladder. And that's when I came over to Simplex and we started, maturing our security offerings, which allowed me to kind of grow and focus even more on that. And it's been a lot of fun doing that. And then, this year was kind of that opportunity to really make that a little bit more official. So I went through the ISC squared certification programs, obtained my CISSP certification and whatnot, which was a great next step and a good way to validate what I've learned and experienced and where those gaps were.
That's awesome to hear. And a lot of times I do get questions from newer members in the security space, whether they are that tier 1 or just looking to break in. What was the timeline on this? When did you first get that help desk job, and how long did it take to maybe get to more of that director level or just move up at all?
So I'm a big fan of the long game. So I got my first MSP job about 11 years ago now, but just kept putting in the hard work and learning and growing and collaborating. And I guess the moral of the story of that journey is everyone's journey really is different. I've seen people go from nothing to an outstanding professional very quickly based on who they are. Other people who are more, focused on wanting to do instant response or forensics or whatever the case may be. So everyone's journey is different, but everyone can take that journey if it's something they want to do.
Yeah, and Adam, I love how you started at the help desk. And I think a lot of people, not enough people go through that experience, because I'm sure you have a lot of those experiences that come back and probably help your understanding and context of the full scope of the organization.
Oh, absolutely. Like think through when an end user clicks on that phishing link, because it does happen. They're not professionals. They're not us on this call. They're accountants and HR professionals and whatnot. So understanding and hearing it from them firsthand when they do report, hey, I clicked on the link, it helps build that empathy that can be lacking in the security space. So we can empathize with them and say, hey, guys, I get it. It happens. You did the right thing by reporting it, and treat those people with the empathy and respect they deserve, which builds a stronger security culture. So at the end of the day, everyone wins.
People need to know that they can call and get that support, without being shamed, so to speak, because, people do click on those links and, they're very crafty. So, even people that have been through awareness training will still take the bait. It happens every day. So,
Yeah, just this morning, one of my colleagues messaged me and says, "Hey, I fell for the simulated fish. I got a Slack invite, thought Slack was for work, and clicked it." And I'm like, "Okay, it happens. That's why it was a simulated fish. It was to catch that early on." And it was a positive learning moment. It wasn't
That's
the, oh, look at
awesome.
you clicked the link. It was the, hey, it happens. Let's focus on the good, the outcomes here. You recognize the signs. You reported it appropriately. You're going to remember this moving forward now. So the next time you get that phishing email, you're going to be a little bit more cautious about it. Does that guarantee that they won't click the link in the future? Nope. They'll keep evolving.
I'm pretty sure that person's never going to click on any links anymore.
No, I think this is a great way to open the episode, because even before I joined the security space, I would hit those simulated links. It would happen, and I didn't know the right protocols of what to do to report it or talk to anyone. So I love that you really emphasize in this the importance of creating that dialogue and making sure they know the channels to go through. So I think that's a big takeaway for everyone listening. But all right, today we will be talking about user account control, UAC. And we have about 10 settings we're going to be going into, but we got into an interesting topic before the episode that I want to really highlight. So, Adam, as you've been growing and coming up through the ranks, you've really gotten into the side of threat intelligence. And you had brought up Microsoft releasing their technical investigation on the Stormkey acquisition. And I was curious if you could just kind of share how threat intelligence and reading these articles apply to your day-to-day and what you do with them. And if you want to share your screen and show that, feel free as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get that screen pulled up, and let's get the right window here, and we'll hit that one, and boom. Okay, so when we saw things that happened a couple months ago, there was a pretty scary incident where the United States government said, hey, we think a nation state got access to some critical accounts. And at the time, the finger was pointed at Microsoft, saying Microsoft had an incident. Microsoft started their investigation, but they couldn't really share too much at the time. So yesterday they released their, kind of after action report saying what happened. And this really breaks down to, you've got a China-based threat actor referred to as Storm 0558 here that acquired a Microsoft account consumer key used to forge access tokens to OWA and Outlook.com. When we look at security safeguards and the criticality of keeping those private keys safe, this was kind of a big deal. How did someone get one of Microsoft's private keys here used? So they broke down what happened. And obviously Microsoft, they do work with the DoD and a whole bunch of critical sectors. So there's this whole thought of Microsoft should be really secure. So what happened? And they're going through, they outline here some of their protection controls and safeguards of how they isolate and contain, just in time and just enough access policies, their assume breach and zero trust approach. But they found here that a system crash in the crash dump process, which should have redacted some sensitive information and shouldn't have grabbed that signing key, a race condition allowed that key to be present in the crash dump. They've since corrected that, but the key happened. Moving on from there, they found that key, again, shouldn't have been there. It followed through the standard debugging process and got out of that secure enclave. And then it got into the corporate environment where the threat actor was able to compromise a Microsoft engineer's corporate account. And once they had access to that, they got into the debugging environment, which contained that crash dump, which contained that key. They even note here that do their own log retention policies, and we know the CIS controls around audit log maintenance and storage. Yep. They had some gaps in there, so they didn't even have logging to confirm the exfiltration occurred, but it was most likely the probable method. Then they got
love that you said exfiltration, and these what we're talking about is effectively it's the attack path, right? These are the MITRE attack tactics that were executed, moving along, getting to the right system, and exfiltrating what they needed to.
Yeah. And then moving on from there, they basically say, here's why this happened. They introduced their common key metadata to help better integrate stuff as things grew on, those APIs, and they found further issues in their process.
Ease of access. Set up for ease of access, not security.
Yep. And that's the challenge that we all have to face as practitioners in today's modern world, is balancing ease of access with security.
I think even the topic today, UAC, I know a lot of users will want to escalate their privileges and get to whatever they need to. I mean, this is very relevant to what we'll be talking about here in a moment.
Yes. Yep. And then, of course, pursuant to any good incident response process. They did their post-incident review and their lessons learned. If we look through this report, there's so many things of the issue's been corrected, the issue's been corrected. And they've highlighted, they identified and resolved that race condition. They enhanced their prevention, detection, and response for key material that may be included. So at the end of the day, you've got some nice transparency from Microsoft shedding light to what exactly happened, showing that they looked over their environment, their practices, found those weak spots and improved them. And well, it's unfortunate that any incident occurs. It's still the right process here. We've got our lessons learned. We've got our process being followed here, and it's allowing Microsoft to be a better company as a result of it.
And
Absolutely.
just imagine the sophistication of this attack, that to be able to identify this weakness that is quite deep within systems, and it just shows the persistence and the sophistication of these nation state actors, in this instance China.
Yep.
So it's a little bit scary from that perspective. You definitely want to have your configurations tight so you're not leaving any gaps.
Yep. And there's another blog that's referenced in here, and I won't get into the details
I
of
like this.
but they get
Yeah,
into their
maybe Adam,
actual
you could
techniques.
drop that past link and this link into the chat for folks that want to.
I did drop the Microsoft
Oh, you
link
did?
into
Okay,
the
good.
live comments. If you
Excellent.
toss me the other link that you had up, I'll do that as well. But Adam, I'm curious. A corporation like Microsoft, obviously multi-billion-dollar company, I imagine they had an EDR in place. I imagine they had some reactive security measures to prevent this from happening. So could you try, I guess, putting you on the spot, could you relate this to the current in atmosphere of MSPs, right? We all have our EDR, we all have antivirus. Why is the CIS benchmarks or these proactive configuration measures, like, why do you need both? Why do breaches keep on happening if there's already an EDR in place?
Well, EDR, simply put, it's more of a detective control. You've got some great opportunities to prevent there, but you can have the best security system in the world, 24/7, armed guards with watchdogs and everything. But if you leave your doors wide open, the threat actors are going to walk right in.
Well, also in the case of stolen credentials, the EDR, thinks it's a known user. So you
Yep.
can act as a known user, which does not trigger EDR tooling.
Yep. And as nation states and threat actors evolve, they're going to keep getting better at their methods. Nation states are a great way to look at what could come down the road.
Mm-hmm.
I just think a year and a half ago, we were talking about the hypotheticals around token theft and what that could be used and how that could be used as an attack surface. We then saw the Linus Tech Tips incident where he had some tokens stolen that allowed threat actors to get into their environment and compromise their YouTube. I just saw a report last night, and I'm going to be doing a LinkedIn post about it either this week or next week. But there's now a business email compromise group that has basically used their tooling and technology to make it achievable for anyone to steal tokens effectively and bypass MFA in the process. They're going to keep evolving.
So let's expand on this and talk about. I'm going to talk about a little bit of the conversations I've been having. So a big thing with the CIS benchmarks and what Senteon does is this concept of defense in depth. We haven't really talked about that too much on these weekly webinars, but it sounds like having an EDR in place, these configurations in place, it's all part of this defense in depth. And that's where I've been taking a lot of my conversations with the MSP market and been even encouraging them to say, hey, to their clients, the reason we need more is because it's a multi-layer process, this defense in depth. So could you kind of talk about your experience? Is defense in depth something you guys talk about internally? Is it something you guys practice? And does that conversation ever go to your end clients, or is that more internal?
It's a bit of both. We look at how we leverage our solutions and we take those to our client base. We're trying to adopt that assume breach mindset and that whole right of boom scenario. I would love to say that every one of my environments will never have a security incident, but if I said that, I'd be lying to you. It's going to happen at some point in time. So how do we contain that incident? How do we minimize that? We can look at something like secure configurations of workstations and say we can harden them reasonably well, but when the threat actor compromises and social engineers an admin account, can they override those defenses? What's going to detect them, contain that? How are we going to handle it appropriately? And there's, I would love to say there's a silver bullet when it comes to cybersecurity threats. There's not. The closest thing I can think of is unplug everything and move into the woods and become a goat farmer. But,
not a bad choice for some people. I would not mind that lifestyle.
Right.
So what I like to add for folks too is, defense in depth can have different meanings for different organizations. And minimally at CIS, the Center for Internet Security, we publish the CIS Security Critical Controls, or the CIS controls. And if you're not aware, there are prioritized set of safeguards that really prevent against the most common attacks against systems and networks. So they're mapped and referenced by multiple legal and regulatory and policy frameworks. And CIS has broken our critical controls into implementation groups. And the minimum cybersecurity hygiene really should be the implementation group 1 for all organizations, or IG1. And the CIS controls go really well with the benchmarks because, the idea is to keep the bad guys out. And, critical control number 1 identifies you must know what's on your network. If you have systems that are on your network that you're not aware of and they're not being updated, they're not being secured properly, it is the door wide open on the house. So, following the CIS critical controls combined with system configuration with the CIS benchmarks really kind of gets you to that minimum layer of cyber hygiene to protect against the common attacks, including these nation state actors potentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love how that first sentence under control 1, why is the control critical to have that inventory of assets? We cannot defend what we do not know we have.
Exactly.
It's that simple.
And expanding on that,
common attack points, there's that system hanging out there that someone plugged in under their desk or whatever. Yep. It's running an old operating system. Maybe it's a form for their bowling league. Who knows what? But so that stuff is out there, and those are attack points.
Absolutely.
Look at the LastPass incident. An employee's home computer got compromised and then pivoted over to the work device.
And that's where these UAC controls are.
Really we kind of transition into that too. But Rich, you said something very very critical. I want to make sure the audience really grasps is the prioritization of these controls. It's not just control 1 arbitrary, control 2 arbitrary. It's an order of a process. Right. And the main thing we're talking about with these CIS benchmarks, this is all about control 4. This is one of the first handful of things you should be doing in your environment after you know your assets. You configure them, reduce the attack surface, and harden as much as you can. Then you move to the additional layers like Adam was talking about with EDR and these other ones. So I love that you brought that up, Rich. Adam, I want to take a few more minutes, and then we do have about 10 settings to cover. But could you talk to us a little bit about this threat intelligence side and how you relate that to your day-to-day work and why you take the time to digest and read those articles?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, the threat landscape is pretty vast. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And in the MSP environment, we serve, hundreds of clients or thousands of clients, whatever the, depending on your size of your MSP, but we protect a lot of organizations and help them out. And that begs the question, how does an individual keep up with this? If there's blog posts left and right, who has the time to do it, right? So having threat intelligence feeds for me tells me what's going on so I can kind of use that information, understand where those conversations are going to occur, where those bigger picture and higher priority items are so I can focus my efforts appropriately. Is every single one of my clients going to be a target of a nation state? Hopefully not. But are they going to have to deal with the latest vulnerability in a piece of critical software? Think the Move It vulnerability. Sure. It's good to know about that ahead of time as that's coming out from these sources, so I can take the approach as a defender to look over my client environments, determine if there's that vulnerability out there, and start the conversations and actions to mitigate and reduce that likelihood of an incident.
One thing that I do, Zach, personally, I think I shared with you this before, it's more in a general perspective, but every morning I listen to the Cybersecurity Headlines podcast. Sure. I think it's from the CISO series.
Yep.
And it's a 7-minute update. It's fast paced. I feel like it's really well done. And they do a weekly summary as well. And so I'll listen to that because it's quick. It starts out my day. And if there's any kind of nuggets that I feel like I need to know more about, I can go ahead and research that on my own. Kind of a broader view, maybe more of a 30,000 foot view than what Adam is talking about, but also very useful information. So shout out to those guys.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's all about, at the end of the day, to your point there, we do have limited time and capacity. So having those headlines brought up to the front from all over the place is great. If
It
you're
is.
like me and a little bit more of a nerd and want to spend more time in that stuff, that's great too. But the key thing is keeping ourselves informed, keeping security practitioners up to date on the latest and greatest, so we can do our job of adequately defending our clients and keeping them informed too.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we will transition now to the topic of UAC. I know when I showed you the list of topics available, Adam, you're pretty excited about this one because you've been through all the changes of UAC, been at that help desk level, and dealt with the challenges of configuring this properly. So, do you mind just kind of transitioning topics and sharing what UAC is at a high level, and I guess why a business needs to have this set up?
Yes, I was fortunate enough, and whether you hold it fortunate or not is another matter. But remember back when Windows 7 or Windows Vista came out with that, "Are you sure you want to do this?" prompt. Everyone's dealt with UAC. We've been dealing with it for years, and at the time, everyone viewed that as that super annoying thing that was just getting in the way. Of course, I'm sure I want to do this. I am the administrator.
I wouldn't have clicked it if I didn't.
Right. But we have to look at what that's trying to do. And what you fundamentally have UAC, user account control, doing is a mechanism within Windows saying something is trying to use elevated privilege. Are you sure you want it to have elevated privilege? When we look at that and what that means from a sysadmin perspective, yeah, I'm installing Microsoft Office, running updates. Of course, I want that to run as privileged so it gets the job done. But when you have a threat actor doing that to gain admin privileges over the system, to compromise, delete backups, remove EDR, whatever the case may be, you want that action stopped.
Adam, are you seeing any instances in the wild where, someone clicked yes on that in a very old version, and those settings have kind of propagated throughout the versions and may still exist today?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of that with some software and how it likes to function and work and behave within Windows. And looking at the attack server, or not the attack servers, but the malware that's out there as well, we can still see it's trying to override and rip out critical protection mechanisms. So it's still relevant and valuable, but it's changed since the Windows Vista days. We're several versions of Windows down the road.
Windows does do a better defaults on UAC these days, that's for sure.
Yeah, and to expand on that a little bit more, what Rich was saying, and this is something Senteon comes across during the majority of our onboardings, is there are some technical debt-heavy applications on some systems that require non-compliant GPO choices or CIS benchmark choices, because without it running in a legacy choice, whether it's SMB1, NTLM1, something deprecated, that application would not have the capability of working. So we talk about this every week, but if it is a critical application and you can't avoid it, document it, create the exception, and so forth.
And what I've seen over the years with that specific point is there's been some software items out there that just wants to write files into a system or into a location that's more privileged. So UAC kicks in to say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And it's like, well, yeah, it's the software wanting to write its logs or its data to this directory here that's privileged. How do we go about doing that, and what can we do to mitigate and address appropriately? And that's the fun challenge for us on the defender side. How do we, analyze, document, report that back, run through your risk management processes with the company? And it's always fun with those ones too, because of how technical those things can actually get when you're saying, "Hey, Mr. Client, I want to make this update here where I change this NTFS permission on this directory to do this." You just spoke a different language for them. They have no idea.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
and
the point is, you don't want to get there. You don't want to have that conversation.
Right.
Yep. And UAC has matured. So let's talk about some of the reasons it does exist. So on the screen here, Adam, I listed out some examples of why a bad actor may want to take advantage of UAC, whether their end goal is to escalate privileges, to gain credentials, modify directory permissions, and DOSing the system effectively. But I listed a handful of these on the slide, Adam. Do you mind just talking towards a few of these and why, if UAC is in place and configured strongly, how it might mitigate the risk of this being successful?
Yeah, so just running through some quick ones here. Privilege escalation. You see the typical macro-enabled Word documents that downloads them with PowerShell and then hits that privilege escalation point. User gets the, "Can you run the software and everything to do the job here?" Or they just say, "Access spreadsheet.exe." There's that aspect there. Your credential access in the key vault within Windows. You have to elevate your session to gain access to that. Drive-by compromises. You've got web browsers trying to do automatic downloads and executions now, depending on the web pages.
And let's pause on that one, Adam.
How doing that?
I've heard drive-by compromises. I mean, AI is coming out rapidly. Websites are looking more and more real. I mean, these drive-by compromises, I mean, is this pretty top of mind fear? Is this something you talk about with your clients potentially?
We've seen some instances kind of close to that where user will go to a website that's maybe not so reputable,
Sure.
and it has the "oh my god, your computer's infected" pop up. In some instances, that will attempt to serve notifications through their web browser saying you're infected. Click here to remediate. It's Microsoft telling me that, so they're getting those
Yep.
notifications native in web browser or through the notification center in Windows saying do something. And users get, they see something that looks scary, that gets that call to action for them. So they're wanting to, they want to stay safe, protect their company data, and they may not be informed. So they're trying to do stuff there. Fortunately, in our use cases, our users are seeing that going, this looks weird and this isn't coming from you. So can you check things out?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Best
But
case scenario.
but that's the result of education and practice there. That
Mhm.
the security awareness training and keeping them up to date. That doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone has that training or background, and other people are just trying to get their jobs done. So it can still
Yeah.
happen.
And one I find interesting that I chose to include on this, we talked about phishing briefly. You know, having a strongly configured UAC will not prevent that phishing email or that bad email from getting in, but how can UAC mitigate, I guess, the damage or the blast radius after it's clicked? Does it play a role?
I would say that would depend on the specific phishing
Sure.
attack and the payload that they're trying to, and whatever their objective is. If it's your typical business email compromise that's happening cloud level, it's probably not going to cascade down to that point. But when they put in their credentials for the phishing attack and then it downloads the spreadsheet or the PDF for the invoice or whatever, now you're going back to your traditional privilege escalation, defense evasion, your usual TTPs that come with that kind of an attack. So you still have to hit those points in security awareness training, teaching users to recognize your phishing emails, put good email security systems in place.
Yep.
But you're helping contain that. They've already fallen for it. They've clicked the link. They've downloaded the payload. How are we containing that incident to protect the confidentiality and integrity of that data?
Yep. Absolutely. It's all goes back to the defense in depth. You still need to configure your email, but this will mitigate the risk. The last one on the screen I included was file and directory permissions modification. So why would a bad actor want to get into here? Is it just to see the information and exfiltrate it? I mean, why would they want to get to this area? Why would a bad actor want to be there?
My initial hot take on that one is it depends on the threat actor's motivations.
Sure.
If it's the Storm Group and Microsoft and everything, they had a clear objective in mind. They wanted specific intel. If it's a ransomware operator, you want to encrypt every bit of data you possibly can to extort for ransom or steal it. So if you're doing your defense in depth appropriately, you've got your least privilege, least access, and they phish an HR employee that maybe doesn't have access to the highly sensitive data drive. If the attacker manages to get domain admin, they can likely override those permissions. But they still have to go through the elevation process to get themselves that access.
Absolutely. And if they have the credentials to escalate, then they're going to be pretty good at their defense evasion technique. Because again, those EDRs, it looks legit.
Yep.
Yeah,
awesome. We see that all the time in our own detections. When I think my favorite is when a network engineer is running advanced IP scanner, and our SIEM alert saying, "Hey, we found an instance of advanced IP scanner running on a network or on a device." I look at that and go, "It's my network engineer that's on site deploying network infrastructure. Of course, they're scanning for IPs." But
try to find those unknown devices on the network, right?
Yep, or just whatever they're trying to do. But that tool doesn't know if it's my network engineer doing his job or a bad guy doing it at 2 a.m, trying to figure out where they can laterally move and find those insecure devices.
That's good to get the report, though, right? You want to know that.
Yeah, I would much rather spend 5 minutes dealing with a alert that I can go, "Yep, this is my people doing their
100%.
job," than "Oh crap, I now need to go into instant response mode."
Yep. That's even something we come across when the MSP engineers deploy Senteon and they change, 500 endpoints. They change 500 settings on each machine with a single click. That's what we do. We have had alerts where Sentinel-1 is like, "Hey, the heck's going on here? Is this intentional or what?" But that is the difference, knowing the schedule, knowing who's doing what, and making sure it is accounted for. So
that's where you click the yes button, Zach.
that's Oh yeah, the easy button, the it's not so bad button. So
I was
now,
trying to be funny.
awesome overview on these. We're right at the 30-minute mark, so let's hop directly into some of these settings, Adam. The first setting that's going to be popping up on the screen is admin approval mode for the built-in administrator account. So CIS does recommend to have this set to enabled. Could you just kind of talk towards this? An administrator account, this is definitely going to be more highly privileged. So if they're in this, why do you want that approval mode enabled?
Simply put, it's an account on every device that I know exists. And if I know it exists, the threat actors know it exists too. If I can compromise this account, I know I can compromise this account across the organization. If this is operating unrestricted, uncontrolled, I've got my most valuable account to compromise for the easiest lateral movement I can possibly find.
Yeah.
Keys
So
to the kingdom.
having this privilege, I mean, you mentioned lateral movement. I mean, getting at this point, if it is easy enough to get in there and it was disabled, it would give them more access to create more harm, increase that blast radius, and go where they want to go.
Yep, and it's containing over what they can do as an admin, making it a little bit more difficult, slowing them down, potentially allowing your detective controls to flag something weird's happening here.
So something we may get into later in the episode is the concept of least privilege. So it sounds like, even looking at this one, this configuration sounds like it has to do with the administrator account. We still need to lock those down appropriately, correct?
Yep.
Yep. So these definitely apply. Very cool. All right, let's hop over to this next one. Behavior of the elevation prompt for administrators again in admin approval mode, and it wants it to be set to prompt for consent on the secure desktop. Little bit of a more, I guess, enhanced recommendation here. What does prompt for consent on the secure desktop mean? Is it a whole different machine? What is this?
So it's kind of boiling down to some additional hardening controls to prevent the ability for things to escape out of the rest of the desktop environment into that UAC prompt to try to override it. What you'll run into is threat actors know that UAC exists. It's been around long enough, right? So what we want to try to do there is what they're trying to do, I should say, is they're going to do everything in their power to still proceed with their objectives. If they can break out of their environment, get into UAC, and have control over that process, then they're approving their own malware to run and execute. So this is trying to help lock that down and keep that from happening.
This is effectively stopping that malware or that bad actor from even interacting with the UAC prompt, not giving the ability to even touch it.
Yep, I see that all the time when we are onboarding a new client or we're trying to help someone on a home connection or an improperly managed company device with our own tools, where we'll go to execute something and we just see the screen go black. We can't see anything else there, and we're like, all right, Mr. User, can you please click yes on this prompt for me? It's just our remote access tool to install stuff, but we don't have admin privileges for it. So can you just click the button for us? It's legitimate. We'll talk through the prompt. We see it ourselves, but it's an annoyance from a sysadmin side, but it's super valuable from a protection mechanism.
And I want to emphasize this story you shared a little bit more. Annoying from the sysadmin side. So this is a setting that we've seen come up during onboardings, that MSPs occasionally don't want to follow the recommendation because it could be an annoyance on the engineer deploying software.
Yeah, it's my understanding, like in that secure screen, you can't paste in credentials and things like that, like copy and paste don't work. It's just another nice layer. You're not dragging forward any malware that's potentially on that machine already in the secure screen mode. So it makes it more difficult for threat actors to use programmatic types of tools to break that password as well. So it's good from that standpoint. And when it's what's really critical though is just kind of having that prompt. If you're provisioning, an admin user also has a day job where they use spreadsheets and email and so forth. So you can provision an admin user with basically two tokens. One is a general privilege, for normal business use. And then if you need to hit those, those sensitive systems to do admin work, that's where that prompt comes up. Ask, in the secure screen. So before you go any further, you need to put in those admin credentials. And, so if your credentials are captured somehow, if your admin credentials are different and they need to be prompted, you're not passing along sort of already compromised credentials into a secure area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if I were a threat actor, I would want to target that sysadmin, that engineer. And if it's using the same credentials,
LinkedIn, right?
Yep, I can do that programmatically from just the LinkedIn API to grab all that data. I can use other stuff out there because sysadmins, we love talking about our work too, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And that gives me my attack path. If I can get access to that device, looking at MSPs and help desks, if I can compromise help desk, I've probably got an admin account across an entire environment in the process.
Yep. Now this next setting here, this is I would say probably the most common setting across MSPs that I've seen and worked with, that they actually do not follow the recommendation. So I want to really highlight this setting here. So this says behavior of the elevation prompt for standard users to actually automatically deny elevation requests. So Adam, I imagine you have some good content on this one, but when I do these onboardings, this comes up and like, oh no, this is part of my workflow. I need to remote in as a user, escalate my privileges, and do the actions I need. Could you kind of explain why CIS would recommend for this to be deny, and maybe the argument that MSPs just can't follow it? Or maybe they should strive? What do you think?
I'm in favor of everyone always striving to be better, but let's look at the day-to-day realities that we deal with. End users love to click things. They just see the thing they wanted to go away, they click yes. That's why you look at Microsoft and phishing resistant MFA and having those, you don't just click the yes button to make it stop, you actually have to do something. So this is an option and method to start to help address that on the workstation side of things. To prevent those click happy end users who will be click happy. But I do understand the frustrations of that at that point is if I am trying to run something as a user that maybe it's QuickBooks or something, and I need to run that as the end user under their session, but it needs privilege to make those setting changes, that can cause some friction and some problems.
So it really goes back to that balancing, usability and security. I mean,
one thing that Senteon can help though is maybe not in that QuickBooks example, but maybe you have a maintenance window where you can kind of open up that setting so the MSP can get in and do some required maintenance work. With Senteon, you can kind of open up that setting for a period of time and have that also closed at the end of the maintenance window. So you can kind of have a planned approach. You are exposing your risk at that point, enhancing your risk, but with a known process like that, it could kind of be a happy medium.
Yep.
That does bring up an interesting use case. Appreciate you calling us out, Rich. But yeah, from the MSP point of view, having that type of exception group where, this is set in the Microsoft default, which is prompt for credentials so that you can escalate your privileges as a user to admin. How much work is it for those engineers and those admins to move an endpoint from the parent baseline group over to an exception and then moving it back when you're done in today's world without Senteon? Is that a process that's common, or is it too challenging to where you'd rather just leave it in the non-compliant state to make sure it is always available? Could you talk towards that at all, or is that a little out of scope?
I can touch briefly on it. What I'd see is it's depending on how you have that deployed, whether it be through your RMM tool, through a group policy object, whatever you're trying to do there. The key thing I see is an MSP will probably go through if they've got that in place and will disable or make the change to do their work.
Sure.
We get distracted, we move on to the next big thing. We forget to turn that back on. And depending on our tools as well as how fast is that change going to propagate. If it's group policy, we might have to wait a day for it to check back in, for the person to log in, for the GPO to apply, and then go through our maintenance window, and then wait for them to go through the process again to reapply the GPO. So we can be leaving that window open a lot longer. And then what happens if there's a group policy object failure? Because that never happens, right? Group policy works perfectly.
Might be a reason we built our company.
Right. So it's all around, well, we could build those processes with our established tools and technology. Human error is still a problem. And
Mhm.
I would love to say,
Mhm.
myself
Big
and my
problem,
team
unfortunately.
always remembers, but we forget just the same as everyone else. We get busy and distracted. People get sick.
Then
It
that fire
happens.
pops up.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said, things come up, the fires, like you do make that change. It's in the exception group. You forget to take it back out or it doesn't actually successfully change. I mean, these are the day-to-day realities that admins and engineers face alike. So great stories on that one, Adam. All right, let's go to that next setting. Detect application installations and prompt for elevation. So you have talked about this quite a bit, the needing to install applications as a user. Um, could you talk towards this setting and does it disrupt that end user experience when they try to install various applications?
Well, it definitely does disrupt that when they try to update and install things themselves. But here's the reality. Not only does malware, as mentioned on the slide there, will disguise itself
Mm-hmm.
as something legitimate, shadow IT is a problem.
Yep.
We go back
Yeah.
to our enterprise control of software assets. Well, when Kathy in accounting is installing random software that hasn't been governed by IT, is that a risk to the compliance frameworks that they may be governed under? It's clearly it's not in your asset inventory because you're not finding out about it. And then all of a sudden your help desk gets that, oh, by the way, can you support the software? And you're sitting there going, what
No.
even is this?
Yeah, I really like this one because as an employee and an end user at CIS, we obviously have this enabled. So,
Mm-hmm.
also we can't put, we're not allowed to connect to public Wi-Fi. You can't plug a USB stick into your system, and you absolutely can't install software. No, it's not. I mean, you could try, but you're going to get a prompt that says you don't have privileges. You need a system admin. Go talk to a system admin. And I don't know. I've never. That's end of story. I'm not going. Hey, system admin, can you install this random software on my laptop, please? It's not going to go well. So,
But
so
Rich,
you just don't do it.
how are you going to listen to iTunes on your company device, though?
I don't.
Adam, I mean,
Anyone else want to be there?
going off that story, and again, our audience being MSPs, could you, what would you say to the MSP that does allow the end users to have this ability?
Don't do
Because
it.
it
You
stops
charge
them from
more.
calling
No,
them.
charge a lot more per endpoint.
It stops them from submitting tickets because it keeps them off your back because they have more access. What would you say to the MSP that cares more about that usability? Is this a conversation they need to have, or?
It's in short and being very blunt here. The simple two words I'd say is do better.
Yeah.
I get it. We all hate service tickets. I hate them as much as everyone else. That's one of the reasons why I try to get more into security and move up the chain because I hate dealing with end users and clients and stuff. But the reality is, if you've got that wild west of people installing random junk, are they breaking license agreements? Are they creating legal liabilities for you as the MSP and for them themselves? Are they installing malware? I would rather take 15 minutes to install a piece of software.
Is that application gonna break something else on the system? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Or is that end user going to call up saying, I'm trying to install a piece of software right now. It's an emergency. Drop everything you're doing to install a piece of undocumented software off the cusp and just the nightmare
and
that.
it's a music player from some random source, uncertified.
Yeah. So, and at the end of the day, that quick install ticket that, maybe it's a 5-10 minute ticket for help desk to work through. That's a lot less time than dealing with a ransomware response.
Well, what you're doing as well with this is kind of what I described. You're training users that no, it's
Sure.
not happening.
Mhm.
We're not going to. And if you make the ticket, it's likely going to be denied. And so, no, the answer is no. You can't put this stuff. You can run the stuff we provide for you, and we'll give you enough stuff and all the stuff you need, but not any other stuff. Sorry.
Yep.
Absolutely. Those conversations definitely need to happen at that end client level. And I'm seeing that more and more because our partners today are asking Senteon to provide more enablement and conversation starter materials. So I do believe the MSP space is transitioning to basically saying, hey, it is my way, the security way, or we can't work together. And I think
You
that
can't
does
afford
lead.
not to. I mean,
Yep.
that's going to introduce so much expense to the process. You would have to quadruple your endpoint price to manage something like that.
Yep. Having these hardened and in place increase that operational efficiency for the MSP.
Yep.
100%.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's not an easy conversation to start off with, but once you get in the swing of things, you start hardening things up, you get that operational advantage.
I don't complain to our IT. I understand why.
You
Exactly.
complain to us on the webinar, but you don't go to IT. But no, perfect. Let's get into this next one. It's another one about applications being installed. This GPO talks about in secure locations. So could you explain what this means? This is where the app is what originating from? Is this where I am geographically? What does this setting mean, and why is it recommended to be enabled?
So, and Rich, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but digging into some of that stuff, you've got your operating system files, and some of those files are more sensitive than others that allow for more control. So if you've got an application trying to dig into one of those more secure directories and infrastructure there, you're probably going to have some additional risk if something is able to compromise that. Is that?
Yeah. You're basically. My understanding is it's kind of in access to tooling that's not normally visible to folks that don't have admin privileges and so forth. So, you're basically opening up additional tooling that could have negative effect if used improperly.
Yeah, and when we think about that, look at how much of critical Windows functionality is in System 32, whether that be your exe for command prompt, PowerShell, your MMC items, all the things a threat actor wants to get a hold of because that lets them take over the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say what this setting is doing alongside everything we talked about, it is making sure it's a trustworthy source. It is the application that it is. It's coming from a verified software application.
Sure.
So
Yep.
Absolutely. It's about making sure that the right applications only get the permissions they need. So spot on. All right.
Yeah, there's all kinds of security solutions built just around that. That will look at those executables and actually will it's the tools everyone probably knows about where can maybe launch some of that stuff in a sandbox and see what happens before even letting it on the network and stuff like that. So there's all solutions built around kind of managing the risk exposed by executables and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Spot on. All right, we got about 3 more settings here. So this next one here, run all administrators in admin approval mode. So again, we were talking about this earlier. Administrators, you still need to harden the administrator account. I guess the did you know fact here is fun. We're all human. The admins can also be tricked or make mistakes. You get busy, but talk about why this setting helps mitigate the risk of a bad actor getting to where they want.
I like what you put under the why it matters here, is that it gives a checkpoint for those admin activities to prevent the harmful stuff. Because we're people. We make mistakes. We could be trying to get an update done at 3 a.m. during an after-hours maintenance window that a client gave us minimal time to do, and we have no sleep, etc. It gives us that checkpoint to pause for a second and think. Because at the end of the day, I've seen security practitioners admit on Twitter, "Hey, I fell for the Amazon email scheme," or you're trying to get a job done, you run the link, and you realize, oh crap, I accidentally grabbed the wrong download. This is not what I want.
Yeah.
I think early in my help desk years, there was the tools that I'm trying to run, like something to check hard drive health and whatnot. And I grabbed the wrong exe and hit the initial prompt of, hey, we want to install this toolbar and this toolbar and this toolbar. And I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't right.
The good old Adobe trick.
Sometimes it's not enough Red Bull, and that happens.
Or too much Red Bull, and you get click happy.
It's got the happy medium.
Yep, absolutely. And let's go. Let's keep on moving through. We have some Q&A, I believe, at the end. So this next one here, switch to the secure desktop when prompting for elevation. Kind of, I guess, talk to us about this. Is this different than the setting we talked about previously, where it fades the screen and goes dark?
No.
Is this a different type of setting? What does this mean?
Rich, it sounded like you had something to mention on that one. If you want to take this one, if not,
I think it's basically the same. I think this is a similar. It's mandating that and someone that has, an admin credential, they're not running around with their admin access token, just doing day-to-day kinds of things. This is where you get that dark screen in the secure space, and you're prompted to use your admin credentials, is my understanding of this. So
Yeah,
that's what we talked about.
If I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I've dove into the technical specifics behind all this. But I believe when Microsoft is working through Windows 10 and Windows 11, they try to do some things to prevent some additional, to do some more security hardening. So trying to keep some code from being able to escape into different areas of the OS and keep it a little bit more contained. And I think this control helps support that a little bit more, of keeping those, that code that's executing in a little bit more of a contained environment. So it's not jumping out and trying to access system 32 or your credential vaults or whatever.
Yep, that's spot on, exactly what it is. So it is doing exactly that, prompts you for the sign in, and it just restricts functionality to the system until this is completed. So it's a little bit more restrictive than the previous.
Makes you think, right, Adam? Which, all right, am I thing here? Do I need that access, or just random things happen?
Yep. All right. Let's hop over to the last slide of today's topic, and then we'll do some questions. Virtualize file and registry write failures to per user locations. So I'm not the most up to date on this one. Adam, do you have more to say on this?
Okay, this is one that I've not dove super deep into for quite some time. So if there's extra stuff on your end that you want to jump in with, by all means. But when we look at how things are trying to write into different directories and registry keys and whatnot, those locations can be pretty powerful. So trying to keep things a little bit more restricted in a kind of a more virtualized environment helps contain those mechanisms and help prevent spread, especially when we're looking at a system that may be accessed by multiple employees. That way, if hypothetically speaking, it's a shared accounting kiosk that for multiple people that come in to run invoices throughout the week, if Kathy's account gets compromised and starts running tricky stuff, inherently, is that malware going to compromise Becky and Stanley and Kevin's account too? Or is it going to be more contained to that one environment versus full system compromise?
Yep. And reading a little bit more about this in the background, it really goes along exactly what you were saying, Adam, but it also restricts applications that maybe at one point did have administrator privileges and since removed from going back and being able to re-enable and go to those areas in that registry where they shouldn't be.
Yeah, because one of the things that this is going to sound worse than I mean it to be, but application developers are not necessarily security professionals and not necessarily sysadmins. They're going to do whatever they need to make sure their program works. And in many instances, and in many instances, we find that butts heads with security initiatives, or you have a sysadmin trying to get through the security initiatives that just goes, if I just turn this off, it'll be done and I don't have to deal with this anymore. Users happy, the ticket's closed, yay. But that might
not be call that tech debt.
Yeah.
Good example of tech debt.
Yep. Awesome. Let's get over to the Q&A slides. I did a little heads up, and if there are any live Q&A, feel free to toss those in the comments. We are paying attention. So I like this first one here that we put. So we talked about this a little bit because a lot of these settings we talked about did talk about administrator configuration. So could you talk about how these UAC choices work with the principle of least privilege and kind of how the organization can benefit from having both these in place?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, not everyone should be a local admin. Everyone should be restricted down to the least amount of privileges they need to do their job. So UAC integrating with that is kind of helps enforce that mechanism a little bit. So that way you don't have Kevin in accounting who's trying to install Spotify in his computer. He can't do that. You're supporting those controls, your acceptable use, all your other corporate policies and standards and benchmarks, etc. So UAC is a tool to help us keep that in check and under control, so we don't have that sprawl of nonsense and that technical debt pile increasing.
We know Kevin uses the same username and password at Spotify as he does at work, so don't do that, Kevin.
Yeah.
And we talked about a lot about the user and even the MSP point of view of how inhibiting or just extra step having these configures could be. But what would you say about striking the balance between these two? I mean, is this set all of these in place no matter what? I mean, what justifies creating that exception and not following a recommendation?
Obviously, the easy answer here is it depends, but
Yeah.
when we look at our role as security professionals, we're there to help each organization achieve their mission safely. So if we find those issues where program ABC does not jive with these controls and it causes a problem, we can take that back to our points of contact at the client and the decision makers and say, look, we've got to talk about this. We've got to talk about the risks, the likelihood, and whether or not it's acceptable for that business. In some instances, they'll say, absolutely not. This is core to what we do. We can't afford to do this. Make an exception. At that point, you're presenting informed decision points to those decision makers, and we can move appropriately. They may simply look at that and say, why is this software being used? What does this do? You know what? We don't want this anymore. Get rid of the software. Security is more important. But it's being able to provide poignant and informative resources to those decision makers so they can make an informed decision with us as security practitioners advising for safety and security.
Very well said.
Yeah, it was very well said. To ask a higher level question, a little bit about, we talked about 10 of these configurations today, 10 or 11. Do you see these being as like entire business decisions, or possibly having one admin have more privileges than the other? Like, would you have multiple groups, I guess, within these settings, or would these typically be an all or standardized type of set across the board?
I'd look at them as standardized across your workstation fleet.
I agree.
Because I would look at those different use cases, and we'll say you do have an application developer on staff. In an MSP space, that might be someone responsible for writing and testing PowerShell automation. They might need higher privileges for what they do, but the question I'd ask is, why aren't they doing it in a virtual environment? Why are they doing it on their base workstation?
Sure.
Off the network. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we're about to come up on this hour mark here, Adam. As we say every week, these CIS benchmarks are all recommendations. They may not be applicable to every environment, but it's very important to always, as Adam says, do better. So, Adam, I'd love to just transition back to you. Do you have any concluding thoughts overall about the topic? Anything you'd like to share?
I'd say ultimately, in the summary, is all of us sysadmins can remember the day of UAC being that lovely joke of a thing that popped up and saying, "Of course, I'm sure." But that was the Windows Vista era. We've gone through Windows 8 or Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10 onto Windows 11. That mindset should have changed a long time ago. Unfortunately, I think it has. But we're at the point now where UAC isn't quite the annoyance it used to be. It's coming up in more relevant conversations. Microsoft has done their homework to make it better. And at this point, we need to do a little bit better, implement some of these benchmarks and safeguards, because at the end of the day, an ounce of prevention is going to take us a long way.
Absolutely.
And speaking from experience, instant response is never fun. You never want to get that phone call or that alert late at night, or in some instances, if you're an MSP that has been compromised at scale, it can be the worst day ever. This is one mechanism you can do to keep that worst day ever from potentially happening.
Do you seriously want to wake up Adam at nighttime? I don't.
I'm a night owl. I'm probably already awake.
He's probably already awake.
Do you want to wake up the grumpy security guy on Saturday morning to say, "Hi, we got ransomware because UAC wasn't turned on"?
No.
That'd be a hell of a thing to go to court and try to attest to. We needed to not have UAC because it allowed us to do this. I feel like no one's going to give you much sympathy.
Right.
No, and like I said, if people push back, I'm an end user that is enforced by these policies, and it's fine. I mean, it doesn't. Is it inconvenient? Not really, because I know what the limitations are. I know I'm not installing software on my laptop. I'm not connecting to public Wi-Fi. I'm not, putting in USB sticks. These things I know are policy, and there's good reasons for them, and good enough. I have a personal laptop that I can choose to do whatever I want with, and that's my solution.
To that point, and this is the thing I love about this too, this makes the end users have to contact help desk for their updates and their installs. So you're not getting the emergency ticket of, "Oh my God, it's not working, I can't do my job." It's scheduled in advance. You already know about it as the sysadmin. So when that day comes, you're already on the phone with the end user saying, "Okay, let's walk through this process together. Let's do this together. Oh no, an error message came up. Let me address this here and now, or start researching it right now." And you're more proactive, and that looks good for the client and shifts that proactive approach a little bit more to where they're thinking, we want to introduce something to our company. We need to talk about this with IT and security first. and everybody wins.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Spot
Agreed.
on. All right, guys. Well, that is wrapping up the episode. Adam, I appreciate your closing thoughts and being here. Rich, absolutely killed it with the user point of view. These settings will not break you. We can survive with a little bit of security.
Fine.
So we're here every week. I know today is Thursday. Typically, we're here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Next week, you can pull up the slide. We do have Steb, Sheil, and Rob. Don't know Rob's last name offhand, but from NetForward IT coming in to talk about system services. This is going to be a massive section going into some of the Xbox settings, RDP settings. It's going to be a big topic. After that, we will have firewalls and then advanced audit policy configurations with Tim Golden, the policy master. So appreciate you guys all joining me. Rich and I are always happy to connect on LinkedIn. Adam as well, as he's growing as we'll call it the I word, the influencer in the space with all the speaking arrangements you're having, Adam. So
I still think
very happy to hear you.
Thank you, Adam.
Yep.
Thank you, Adam. And we look forward to talking to everyone.